What was your worst "why the F did I say that" moment? So, one day when I was young, probably 10 to 11 years old, my aunt and uncle came to our house to visit us. My mom, stepdad, brother, aunt, uncle, and myself were all looking through our old family pictures, and we came across this picture of me, age 2, and my brother, age 7, playing in the sprinkler. So everyone starts laughing at the picture, mostly because I'm an unclothed kid jumping through the sprinkler, and my brother laughs and goes, "I'm going to take this to school and show everyone," meaning that he was going to take it to school and embarrass me in front of our friends. Well, my brain decides to go full crap mode, and I blurt out to him, "Why? Does it give you a boner?" Mainly, I think I was trying to embarrass him, and it was the only thing my crap kid brain could come up with at the time. Everyone stops laughing and just stares at me. I realize the impact of what I said, and my stepdad just goes, "What the F is wrong with you? Go to your room!" And I get up from the chair and run upstairs, wishing I could just disappear forever. I sometimes think about it and just have to ask myself, why? Why do you do this to me, brain? Edit. I think someone asked. I'm a guy, which makes it double awkward. I think 10 to 11-year-old me thought that having a boner was embarrassing, so I really nailed him with that zinger. The collective horrified looks from everyone in utter silence was probably the worst part about it. However, the responses I've received from everyone have been hilarious and have made me feel a bit better about it. I regret that I have but only one upvote to give for each one of your fantastic comments. Thanks for the gold as well. Story number 2. Back in high school, my sorta girlfriend, we'd been dating for maybe 2 months, invited me over to her house to hang out at their pool and with her family. I went. The dad was very intensely Baptist, of the common sort in the South, and on my first date with his daughter, had asked me to explain why I deserved to go to heaven, but I sort of got along with them because I'm generally good at getting along with most of anyone, so I was having a good time that day. Girlfriend, her parents, and I started playing some board games together. There was some friendly banter and smack talk going on. Girlfriend and I had watched Anchorman a few days earlier, I'm pretty sure, so I started repeating some of the quotes from that movie back at her for the banter. I knew it was a little risky since the parents didn't let anyone watch anything that wasn't A Walk to Remember or Seventh Heaven, but whatever. There was enough background noise where I got away with it a few times. But then came one of those moments where all background and conversation noise ceases, which coincided with me telling my girlfriend to go back to your home on Whore Island. I muttered a thing or two about being from a movie we watched, which barely helped anything, since they definitely saw me as corrupting their good Christian girl from there on out. Story number 3. I was 15 and in the early stages of my emo phase, so I wore skinny jeans. Except they didn't make skinny jeans for men at the time, so I wore girl jeans, just as many of my male skinny jean-bearing friends did. Now for the actual story. So, I went to a birthday party at a local restaurant, but I didn't normally speak to anyone there except the birthday girl and another one of my buddies. This, alongside my social awkwardness, made it difficult to think of a conversation topic. The girl across from me goes up to the bathroom, and I noticed that she had a familiar pattern on her jeans, and I thought it was the key to not sit there awkwardly, and as she comes back and sits down, I immediately said, "So, I noticed we're wearing the same jeans." I still think about it 8 years later. Edit. It's not the fact that I was wearing girl jeans as much as the fact that it was the first sentence that the girl had heard from me. Okay, look, y'all, I know we live in a time where we're a bit more progressive and positive, at least in certain parts of the world, but this sounds like an early 2000s story, and I'm willing to bet if you're a guy wearing girl jeans, you are gonna get some head turns and head scratches, and maybe some point-and laughs, and maybe a few "you're gay" in the derogatory early 2000s way. But now, in the modern times, if you wear girl jeans, some people will still look at you and say, "What the hell's wrong with you?" But now, there's a group of people who will say, "Yes, slay, queen, YOLO. You rock those jeans and your ass looks good." Anyway, next story. Story number 4. When I was about 8 years old, our school had a post box for Christmas cards, and about once a week teachers would come around and give the children their respective cards. One of my classmates, Ryan, who for some reason always disliked me and picked on me, occasionally got a card and opened it to see the words, "You will die." He laughed it off, but the next day my teacher attempted to launch a full-scale forensic investigation and incorrectly concluded that the handwriting was mine and I had the motive. I denied it repeatedly because I had absolutely nothing to do with it, but my teacher just wouldn't let it go. He called class meetings to see if anybody knew who had sent the card. No success. He pulled what few friends I had into a private room to see if he could get them to rat me out. No success. He kept trying to surprise a confession out of me by occasionally mentioning the card's recipient's name in general conversation and gauging the reaction on my confused infant face. No success. Eventually, about a week later, my teacher dropped the bomb. My class would not be allowed to go to the school Christmas party disco thing unless the culprit is found. Being that I didn't have many friends at the time and I was fairly socially awkward, I decided it wouldn't be a big deal if I missed that party, and that I should take one for the team. Now, here is the "why the F did I say that" moment. I told my teacher that it was me who sent the card so that my class could have fun, and to this day, I regret it. I was sent to the head teacher's office, which when you're 8 years old and terrified of unknown consequences, you arrive at in tears, where I was shouted at for about half an hour. I was told how despicable I was, what a disgusting thing it was to do, and he even said that it almost became a police matter because it was a death threat. I vividly remember the head teacher looking really disappointed at one point and him saying to himself, "And this is supposed to be the season of goodwill to all men," and I just felt awful. I was made to apologize to the classmate in question as well as write a 3-page letter of apology. Then the worst part. My school called my parents, and they were horrified about what I had supposedly done. It was an incredibly negative formative experience for my childhood, and I think about it regularly. Because of my stupidity and my teacher's actions, I was ostracized by my peers for a long time, which made my early years quite difficult. Even 19 years later, every so often I think about going back to my school and speaking to my old teacher and head teacher to clarify the situation, explain that it wasn't me, set the record straight. Last time I looked at the school website though, both have left, so I guess it's something I will have to live with. Story number 5. I was asked to come in for an interview, but also to create a presentation on how one would upload a video to YouTube, as for the job I was interviewing for, I would be explaining social media platforms to political organizations. Just a baseline 15-minute presentation. Cool. Made my presentation on with laid out screenshots in a PowerPoint. I go in, and the head of the startup decided she wanted to be a part of the interview. I pull up my PowerPoint, and she goes, "Oh, I hate PowerPoints. Just show me how you would demonstrate it to a client." Well, I wasn't prepared for a demo. I got flustered and rooted around my computer for a random video and had to upload it to my personal YouTube account, which, mind you, is filled with recommended Vine compilations and pimple-popping videos. The other interviewer felt bad because she told me to prepare the wrong thing, so as I am taking 10 minutes setting up, she starts asking me questions about the platform. "So what kind of things can you not upload to YouTube?" By this point in the train wreck of an interview, I was so distracted and off my game, I said, "Well, YouTube has a lot of video standards, so you can't post vulgar things. Like, you shouldn't post adult content to YouTube." I said to the startup founder, word for word, not to upload adult content to YouTube. And then I had to spend another 30 minutes giving a poor demonstration. They called 2 hours later to let me know it was a pleasure to interview me, and they would be going with a different candidate. Story number 6. Recently graduated from one of those programming boot camps, and I landed an interview for my number one choice of companies I wanted to work for. This was the first time I went through any sort of formal interview process, and my first time trying to get into the corporate world, and I was hella nervous. First interview was a video interview, the kind where you are prompted with a question and then have 3 minutes to answer. You're recorded and essentially talking to yourself, no one else around, no way to get a conversation rolling, and you can't redo any answers. First question, I panicked and ran out of stuff to say in about 10 seconds. I got really nervous and ended my recorded reply with, "So, yeah, thanks," and I hastily clicked next, sweating bullets and starting to nosedive. Rattled and spiraling, I continued my snowball avalanche of nerves and panic, and at one point, I answered the question, "Why do you want to work here?" with, because this company effing rocks." Oh crap, I swore, F, and then I hastily clicked next again, and I did not get the job at that time. I did get a friend referral a few months later for a different position and now work at the same company. Story number 7. Actually, this is far worse than my previous comment. So my ex and I had just been through a very traumatic experience. We were at the beach just sunbathing on the boat dock, and we noticed a dude trying to swim from a boat to the shore. It wasn't a particularly long distance, but tourists tend to misjudge just how cold the lake is. If they're drunk, it's not uncommon for them to drown due to the shock, and this was happening to that guy. My ex jumped in to save him, and eventually we got him to the shore, but it was too late. He died on the scene, and we were all shaken by the experience, especially my ex, since she was the one who initially tried to save him. Anyway, we leave and go back to her house, and she seemed okay. I knew she was probably suppressing it, and I just wanted to comfort her. Well, my dumb brain decided sex would definitely comfort her, and before I could stop the inevitable verbal train wreck, I already finished the sentence, "So, do you want to have sex?" And yeah, it didn't go over well, and I knew I immediately effed up. So, guys, what is the over-under that this is the reason OP keeps referring to her as his ex? Oh, this is going to be a tough video for people who cringe secondhand. Usually that happens to me, but it hasn't happened yet so far, at least for apart from the first story. But you know what? If you're somebody who cringes from hearing other people's experiences, I am there with you, okay? I am holding your cringy, sweaty hand. Next story. Story number 8. I've got one for any forsaken soul this far down in the comments. I got my first apartment about a month after I turned 18. It turned out that a cute girl from my school lived in the same building, so we would hang out and play video games together or cook stuff together. When I look back on it, she was most definitely trying to get some, but she was 16. Even though the age of consent was 16 in my state and crap would have probably been totally fine had it gone down, nothing ever happened. And I'll admit that I was pretty socially awkward and didn't pick up on hints or was too afraid to make any moves. Anyway, a lot of PG hanging out between this girl and I. Well, one day we're in my apartment and we hear some angry slamming on my door. It's her mom and she's pissed because she obviously thinks that we're boning 24/7. She storms in and tells her daughter to grab all her stuff and leave. And as the mom is walking out after her daughter, I'll never effing forget this in my life. She asks me, "Do you even know how old she is?" with this half condescending, half disgusted tone of voice. And then, my genius response was, "The age of consent is 16. So matter-of-factly that there would never be a thing anyone could say to convince her I wasn't plowing her daughter all along. She looked bewildered for a split second before she says, "Oh," and left my apartment. That crap haunted me to the bone for so long until I became more comfortable with sexuality and socializing in general. Then I realized that my deadpan delivery was actually hilariously ballsy, and I would have never had the courage to say what I did if I only knew what the F I was saying. Story number 9. I'm kinda late here, but hopefully someone will see this. So, this took place the night before graduation from college. I had very casually been seeing this girl for the last month or so, but seeing may be too strong of a word. We mostly just had a lot of sex. I was going into the army and she had a job on the other side of the country, so we had decided to just call it at graduation and go our separate ways. She had a very assertive, aggressive personality, and I am a more carefree, easygoing kind of guy. This is relevant later. So, it's the night before graduation and her parents are at this college party. Imagine 50 drunk college kids about to graduate and 2 parents. I am hammered out of my mind and decided to tell her mom a joke that had been floating around our friends, and the conversation went like this. I said to her, "Hey, do you want to know your daughter's favorite sex position?" And then she says, excuse me? It's her, on top of me and crying. And now, the daughter and I have been married for over 10 years. Story number 10. This was something I said that didn't come back to bite me for about a week or two. I joked in front of a cousin of mine that my father probably wasn't my biological father. This was 100% a joke, and based on the fact that my younger brother inherited everything from our father biologically, aside from his thin on top hair, the flip side of the joke was that that was the only thing I inherited from him biologically. Well, my cousin used to love to go back to our grandparents and tell them anything and everything me and my group of friends did or planned to do, and she told my grandmother what I said. Fast forward a week or two later, I was at my grandparents again, and my grandmother sat me down and asked why I said my father wasn't biologically my father. I said it was a joke amongst my friends and cousin, and she broke down crying, saying my mother had claimed I wasn't my father's son when they split up. I was 5-ish, and they decided not to say a word and didn't want a DNA test to prove it either way, unless it came out and I wanted proof. It has been many years since that conversation with my grandmother, and my father didn't mention it for over 10 years, until this year actually, and I kept asking myself, why the F did I even joke about that? And no, I've not had a DNA test to prove it either way. I have a father and stepfather, and I don't need a third wheel. Story number 11. My sophomore year of high school, I had a huge crush on this popular senior soccer player who happened to drive a Jeep Wrangler. Of course, I researched everything I could about Jeeps and soccer due to my overwhelming love for him. I even lied to everyone and said my uncle was going to give me his Jeep for my 16th birthday. One day, we had a huge tropical storm blowing in right during the time between periods where everyone is running to class. I was late for pre-calc and came running into the room about 30 seconds late, soaking wet from rain. The teacher asked if I was late because I was dancing around in the rain, and I was like, no, I heard Ben Wood was looking for me to help put the cover on his Jeep because I'm the only person in the school who knows anything about Wranglers. And one of his soccer teammates was in my class, and he turned so casually to me and he said, "You're so full of crap. I rode in with Ben today and the top was already on." Well, I later found out that the teacher also drove a Jeep Wrangler, so I literally chose the stupidest possible lie to make it look like I was cool. It's been 20 years later, and I still cringe over it. Story number 12. I was studying abroad in Paris for fall semester. I was living with a host family that had a single mother and 3 young adult children. 2 of them were women and 1 was a man. The mother of the house was often gone on a traveling trip for her work. When she was gone, her children would sometimes come spend the night at the apartment. One night, the oldest daughter was there and I was up late at night studying for a test. She brought home a guy with her, and eventually I heard them having really loud sex in her brother's room. I was staying in her old room, and it was hilarious to me, and I never really thought anything of it other than to tell my friends and laugh about it later. One night, it was just the son staying the night, and I happened upon him and his friends smoking weed in the living room. I was a huge stoner at the time, and they ended up offering me to smoke with them. Keep in mind, I hadn't smoked for like a month or 2, and they were smoking hash. I had never smoked that before, so I got pretty damn high. We were in the kitchen talking about random crap, and I literally have no idea why, but when we were talking about his sister, I mentioned that she had sex in his room, and it was incredibly loud. He was really upset, and I realized how badly I effed up by mentioning that to him, and I still to this day think about it and wonder why I said that. Maybe I was too high, but I don't usually say crap I'm not supposed to when I'm really high. Story number 13. To truly understand this mistake, you will need a little backstory. So, my dad has cancer, or had, I should say, because unless you've also had cancer, you probably don't know that people who get it still say that they have it even when it's in remission. Like having herpes, I guess. There's not always a flare-up, but you're not really cured. So my dad, who has now beaten cancer 4 times, refuses to ever say he's beaten it into remission, ever, and keeps insisting that he's still got it and could die at any effing moment. This has been going on for nearly 20 years, and in case it isn't painfully obvious, it's a little exhausting. "Why didn't you ask me about my cancer?" He will ask me at the end of a conversation in which he has already told me his next checkup isn't for 6 months because he's in remission from his latest bout. And I would reply with, "Gee, Dad, I don't know." Man, I'd love to say some snarky crap like, "Because the doctor told you not to effing stress about this, at least until your next checkup, and also this is like 50% of our conversations, and I'd like to think about your actual life and not your impending death, especially given that you appear to be effing immortal," but this is my dad. And also, I love him and understand him that he's in a constant state of fear and has been for 2 decades, and that can F with a man. So I usually just apologize and try to cheer him up, which is why one day, a few years back, I decided to tell him a funny joke that I'd just heard. I said, "Hey Dad, want to hear a funny joke that I just heard?" I asked him. And this was over the phone, which is good because the joke was not appropriate at all. Here's the joke. What did the dead, dumb, and blind kid get for Christmas? Cancer. Okay, that's the joke. I didn't say it yet, but I hope we can all agree that this joke was in poor taste, to put it mildly. But I was focused on making my dad laugh, and I laughed when I heard this one, so out of my mouth, the words came to him, "Okay, so what did the deaf, dumb, blind kid get for Christmas?" And as my dad was replying with the standard, "I don't know, what did the deaf, dumb, and blind kid get for Christmas?" my brain tried to stab itself in the medulla oblongata as it realized the magnitude of its mistake. Did I mention that my dad also has no sense of humor about his cancer or cancer in general, or really has no sense of humor at all to begin with, even when the subject is benign? Shut up, you. I'm proud of that pun. Anyway, yeah, Dad was not going to appreciate this joke. I did not appreciate that my brain thought that this was a good joke to tell. And I'm thinking to myself, why the F did I say that? My brain asked my mouth, trying to pass the effing buck like the little female dog brain that it is, and my dad's like, "Son, what did the deaf, dumb, blind kid get for Christmas?" Back to the present, I couldn't say the real punchline. Too soon, inappropriate, and inconsiderate. If Dad hadn't already blown through my inheritance on cancer medicine, I would no longer be in the will after this one. "Son, what did he get?" And my dad probably thought I was having a stroke. I might have been having a stroke. Did it smell like toast in here? So I just said, "A bicycle." "I don't get it," my dad said, which at least was his standard response to most jokes. And I said, "Yeah, it's not a very good joke." F my life. Story number 14. I work in an office and I am surrounded by from well-to-do white Christian families. I ain't here to debate how good or bad different demographics of people are as a whole. They're all nice people, but I'm not from that upbringing. No, my roots are more of the white trash variety, but here I am kind of a fish out of water. So apparently these people don't have the same sayings as my people, and it can lead to misinterpretations. One time I said in a meeting, "I'm on it like white on rice," and I got some gasps. What? White on rice? More gasps. Well, someone must have taken that as a racial thing, and the next day I'm in HR talking about my interpersonal skills or whatever. I keep in mind at that point that these people might not know what some of the crap I say means and could mistakenly take it the wrong way. I guess I wasn't thinking of that when I said at a company lunch that something gives me the heebie-jeebies. More gasps. Oh, what the F? Next day, another trip to HR. Okay, so apparently I should just avoid speaking around these people. Well, I made it less than a day. Our intern shows up late because of car issues. He walks up to our desks, and before I can stop myself, I look him in the eye and say, "Hey Bobby, how's tricks?" And cue third HR meeting, where I thought I was getting fired for sure, but instead got an official reprimand on permanent record, which I'm still not entirely sure what that means. And it turns out from stories I've heard, it's pretty difficult to get fired from this place. Story number 15. Oh God, why did you remind me of this? Job interview for a real peach of a software engineer position. A grueling 8 solid hours of interrogation by practically every developer in the company, every manager, the CTO, the CEO, and finally, the HR representative. Despite the marathon length of the interview, it felt like it was going really well. I had answers for every question. I solved every problem presented. Each person basically high-fived me at the end, and I walked into the HR office feeling very confident. Then the HR lady says to me, "Well, the team seems very impressed. I just have a few more issues to nail down. What is your salary expectation?" Then I reply to her X amount, let's just say $100,000, and she says, "That's definitely reasonable and doable on our end." Then I say, "Excellent. And the final thing is that we would like to contact your current employer to verify your employment and get a few references. Would that be okay with you?" "Yeah, no problem." "Great. Some people aren't okay with that, but we find it useful to find what your current boss thinks of you." "Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not like I killed a person or anything." And my inner thoughts were like, why the F are you saying this? This job is in the bag and you have to bring up the topic of potential suspicion of murder at your current job? Why? She just stares at me for a few seconds and says, "Well, I would certainly hope not." So I punched myself in the face repeatedly, all the way down the elevator ride and out onto the street, where my recruiter called me immediately to tell me that they were going to pass on me because I did not have experience in some oddball technology we didn't even talk about in the interview. He was like, "The weird thing is that technology is not even listed on the job interview, so I'm not sure why they're suddenly bringing it up now." And I told him, yeah, it was weird, but kiss Sarah, or whatever. I didn't want him to bail on me because I say stupid crap in the clutch. Story number 16. Late to the party, but a story below dug this out of my brain jail so you can revel in it while I bury myself up to the neck and have my duck eat at my eyes. I did it in elementary school, and it is my first and biggest experience with taking a joke too far, and that jokes can not only be stupid to other people, but offensive. I think it was 3rd grade. We did journal entries about our weekends or something every Monday to help with short narrative, handwriting, and drawing. Well, this Monday was April Fool's Day, so everyone was writing witty jokes about their weekend. They met Britney Spears at Target, or they got $1 million or whatever. Well, I, in my hilarious mind, decided that my dad was dying was comedy gold. So I wrote my short entry and drew a picture of my dad being buried. We turn in our assignments, and I was certain I had the best joke journal in class. I slayed it. Seriously, I would be crowned comedy god and my journal entry would be Hall of Fame entry worthy. Well, the teacher flipped through the stories and said, "Oh, some people had some amazing weekends," and then stopped. "OP, what is this?" So, I can see where this is going. She thinks this joke is not funny, and either she's going to make me rewrite it or I'm going to be in big trouble. Plus, people are going to think I'm not funny. We can't have that. And I say, "That's my weekend." "This is an April Fool's entry, right? It's not really appropriate." That's a nice way of saying it's not funny. And I think people asked, and she showed the picture and read it out loud. People snickered, but it was hardly the uproarious Apollo crowd that I had come to expect. And she gave me an out, though. But I said, "Well, it's an April Fool's Day entry because that's today, but that happened on my weekend." And I doubled the F down. Now, she knew it wasn't true, and I knew it wasn't true, and the class knew it wasn't true. But here I am, defiant as all get out, saying my father had passed 2 days ago. And oh yeah, not crying or anything. Started out smirking because I'm hilarious, but now that I'm in hot water, I'm just scared and fighting. Not sad or anything. So if there's even a 3% chance of doubt here, I look like a Dodge-rammed psychopath. Well, the principal was called. My parents were called. I had to meet with the principal and school counselor immediately. Then with the counselor for a few hours each week for, I want to say, a month or so. Like 2 to 3 days a week, an hour or so of class time missed. Why would you say that? Why would you joke about that? Do you hate your dad? Why do you hate your dad? Why do you want your dad dead? They went full psychoanalyst on me. And while I'm an adult now and can recognize some of the failings of my parents and knew in high school I was more of a forgotten child than anything else, I have no idea what sort of truth or fiction I felt I had to spin to get out of that chasm of a dumpster fire. I'm almost certain the police got involved at some point, and though I've managed to suppress that memory until now, my parents definitely got called into the school, probably multiple times. Embarrassing for my family, especially since we had a bunch of kids and I wasn't the first or last to go to that school. We lived close for my whole childhood and yeah. Oh man, I'm gonna have to talk to my mom about this. I hope to whatever realistic interpretation of God exists that it was just a vivid nightmare. Story number 17. One time I had to make a speech in front of class. It was part of the lesson, everybody had to do one, and I was new to the class since I just moved and changed to a new school. My teacher told me that I had to make my speech about school shooters. It was 2012 when it seemed that almost every 2 weeks one school shooting had happened. As I said, I was new to my school, so my classmates still didn't know me really well. I did my speech exactly as planned. I wrote it down and learned the words and said them, of course, without paper. And in the end, I really don't know why, it wasn't even planned. I said in German, "That's why you should treat your classmates friendly and nice, because otherwise they may shoot up the school," while I was looking directly to the class bully. It was unintentional, but it seemed like a hidden message. Everybody, including the people that didn't really listen to my speech, started to look at me as if I had just told them I was actually going to do it. And my teacher said, "Oh, wow, is everything fine with you?" I just wanted to die and disappear in that moment and not answer that question. Everything was fine, but I mean, that's what a school shooter would say. Still, when I remember, I get embarrassed. Since then, my schoolmates were kind of afraid of me. Good thing, I didn't get bullied though. Story number 18. When I was a junior in college, my ex's parents loathed me. Her abusive stepmother went through her Facebook chats and saw all the terrible things I said about her to cheer my ex up, and I was basically banished from their house. That didn't stop her from bringing me over when they were out for the weekend. Pretty sure I left a few solid stains in their couch while they were away. Anywho, it's one of those weekends. We drive up to her place and we're all over each other. We go to her room and resume making out, and then my ex decides to go down on me. Now, remember how I said I wasn't allowed at their house? It had been a while since I was there, and with her focusing her attention on the southern head, I had my first moment to take in my surroundings. I noticed she had redecorated, specifically with 2 teal lamps, one on each dresser, and I open my big mouth and I say, "Are those new lamps?" And she was pissed. Basically, I had cock-blocked myself due to my dumb lack of a filter. I never lived that down as long as we were together. She would bring it up often to poke fun at me and point out any new decorations when I would go over to her place, just so we could get that out of the way. They were new, by the way. Story number 19. Oh man, let's set the stage. U.S. military deployed to the desert, escorting 2 fellow service members that weren't cleared to be in my building, so I had to follow them and make sure they're not secretly baddies or something. So it's me, Jack, and Jill. Jack and Jill have come around a few times before. I've chatted with them and we have a decent relationship while I'm escorting them. Jill is cute. It's the desert. I barely see women, let alone cute ones. Jill is tan-skinned. I am also tan-skinned, and Jill mentions that her bunk is way too cold. This is relevant. Then we get on the subject of ethnicity, and she says she's 25% Native American. I, being the absolute genius I am, respond with a joke. "So, Jill, is that why you're always cold?"
What? Is what why I'm always cold?
"Because you're Native American."
Huh?
"You won't get tricked again into using a blanket given you by the American government." "Nope, that's how you end up with smallpox." And dude, the silence from Jill, the uproarious laughter from Jack, and the dumbfounded, "what the F is wrong with me" look on my face. Story number 20. Oh boy, do I have a good one. I was scheduled for a second interview for a casino marketing position. The first interview went exceedingly well, and I was all but 100% sure the job was already mine. Second interview takes place, and I'm being questioned by 2 females, the marketing director and her subordinate. I'm a male, this is pertinent. The interview goes well, and we all start to kind of shoot the crap, so to speak, so the interview takes a more relaxed approach. We start talking about how I am an ex-chef, and they tell me how that would be great because they're always hungry. The next words out of my mouth were, "I get hungry easily, so I always keep something on me. I usually have a banana in my pocket, and I always share." Why the F did I just say that? Wow, you can imagine their eyebrows raised reaction to that. I didn't even try to save face to explain that I genuinely like to have fruit or a granola bar on me at all times for snacks. A mother effing banana in my pocket? Kill me. Needless to say, I didn't get the job. Story number 21. I was running really late for a flight, so I just jammed everything I could into my bag. I honestly don't even know how it zipped shut. I made it to the airport and had like 15 minutes to spare. I got in line for security and there's only one guy behind me. I'm pretty confident at this point that I'm going to make my flight. There were close to 10 random TSA agents standing around doing nothing except chatting. My bag goes through the scanner and they tell me that they will need to open it. This is the last thing I need, but I agreed because what else can you do? This agent has his hand on the zipper and asks me, "Is there anything dangerous in this bag that could hurt you or me?" And without even thinking, I said, "No, but if you touch it the wrong way, it might explode." And silence. you could have heard a pin drop. Every TSA eye is on me, and the guy behind me stops and steps away. You can see they're on high alert now, and I probably set off some post 9/11 protocol. Trying to fix the situation, I blurted out, "No, I mean, it just has so much stuff in it that it might blow open," realizing that probably didn't help. I finally put my head down in defeat, and all I could muster was, "There's nothing dangerous, I'm just an idiot." They eventually went through my whole bag, patted me down, and ran my hands under the chemical machine. After coming to the conclusion that I was pretty harmless and just dumb, they let me go. As I was leaving, the TSA agent who had been helping me said, "Next time, why don't you think about what we're saying? If you can't do that, it's better not to say anything at all." And I barely made the flight, and the man behind me made it too. He told me it was the scariest and funniest moment he had ever heard at the airport. It was funny for me until much later. All of this happened because my mom put a new bottle of nail polish in my sneaker. She wanted to surprise me. Mission accomplished, Mom. Story number 22. There was an in-class assignment which had the teacher ask us some popular songs of that time. This was when Soulja Boy was popular in that Superman song. I thought because that song was so popular that everyone would know all his other songs. Bear in mind that this is when I had an absolutely disgusting taste in music. He had another song called Girl You Stank, which is pretty self-explanatory. I assumed that everyone would know this song. So I raised my hand to answer the question, and she called on me, and I said, "Girl, you stank." Nobody laughed. The silence was deafening. The teacher said to repeat it because she didn't hear me. So I did, and then she totally heard me this time. There was another moment of silence, and at this point my idiot self finally realized that I should probably put the context to that statement before everyone thinks I was crap-talking the teacher. "No one's heard of that song," I said, and I swear at least 7 students all said no at the exact same time. The teacher just goes, "Anyways," and picks on someone else that had their hand held up. This all happened in the first 5 minutes of a 75-minute class. Story number 23. Oh man, I swear I was just thinking about this the other day too. I am a huge Dave Grohl fan, and serious about the Foo Fighters as well. I have loved them since they first came out. Heck, even before I even heard their first song just because of his association with Nirvana, I just knew I was going to love them. Anyways, long story short, I got to meet Dave in 1999. Got some pictures with him, got some drumsticks signed, awesome. Fast forward to 2008 now. They are playing in my hometown again, and I brought copies of the photos with me thinking that I would get close enough to the stage and I could give it to him. I don't know what the hell I was thinking back then, but the thing that really keeps me up at 2 a.m. sometimes is what I actually said to try and get his attention. I'm about 2 people back from the front barricade, and Dave comes down close enough, and he's doing this little guitar lick, and I'm waving my photos, like if he was going to really grab it or something, and he was looking, and I yelled out, "You suck!" And I have no effing idea why I thought that would even be a good thing to say, but I said it, and it was like one of those things that immediately hit me. Why the hell did I just say that? Probably for shock value, but I'm certainly glad that he either didn't hear it or didn't respond. I just remembered some girl in front of me turns around and gives me the nasty stink eye like, "Why are you even here then?" and then turns back around. Easily one of the dumbest things I've ever said, out loud, and to my favorite musician too. Ugh. Story number 24. In university, me and my buddies were at a restaurant and talking about high school stuff. There was this girl who was a feminist and was really mean. She would try to make other people cry because of their political beliefs and thought that was something to be proud of. She would boast about it on Facebook. Anyway, main idea, not a great person. So, we were talking about how at our graduation party, she had sex with this guy in his tent and allegedly let him use the back door. We know it was her because at least 20 other people, guys and girls, were looking into the tent's mesh vents on the top. Unfortunately, her boyfriend was not the guy and was not old enough to drink, so he sat at a table alone. For some reason at that moment, my brain and filter shut down completely and I decided to say, "So, because she's a feminist pig," very loudly when the waitress was just getting up to our table. Needless to say, very awkward and cringeworthy. I wanted to crumple up into a ball and roll away, and it's been nearly 5 years and it still cringes me to this day. Story number 25. I was in a user interface class at my university for comp sci, and we were on the topic of video games, and Starcraft 2 came up. I was into playing it at the time, somewhere around Platinum and Heart of the Swarm, and enjoyed the esports scene a lot. When we were talking about the UI design and things like that, there was a bit of a class discussion on the game itself. Despite being a generally quiet guy, this was an area I was quite comfortable in, so I decided to throw in my opinion. Generally, it's very difficult for foreigners to compete. It takes them a lot more work to reach a decent level. I should emphasize at this point, I am in Canada. I've never gotten so many glares and looks of outrage, and my professor just looked totally floored. Like, why the hell is this generally nice young man talking crap about foreign people? It was a very awkward situation trying to explain explained that I was not in fact racist, but that in SC2, the term foreigner just means not from South Korea. And were I competitive, I would be labeled a foreigner. I made up for it by never speaking in class again. F that. So, OP never socializes, decides to give it a try one time when a video game gets mentioned, speaks, gets labeled as a racist, fails tremendously, curls up into a ball, and then decides never to socialize again. Yeah, that sounds like a Redditor. Anyway, next story. Story number 26. When I was in 4th grade, we were watching a presentation involving a globe. This very popular, very mean girl named Hannah, cutely tilting her head, asks, Teacher, why don't people at the bottom of the earth fall off? And everyone laughed at her and coddled her, which she loved. Scheming little crap knew playing dumb and cute would get her noticed. Well, I can play that game too. The teacher asked a question and I raised my hand confidently. The teacher called on me and I blurted out, throwing my hands in the air, I have no idea! Absolutely beaming and waiting for the laughter. Well, no laughter, only silence. The teacher looked at me disappointed and said, well then, you don't raise your hand. Does anyone else actually know the answer? Well, Hannah did, and to this day, that event haunts me. Story number 27. I was a sophomore in high school. I was short, pudgy, and didn't have many friends, so I was picked on and bullied quite a bit. Well, there was this time when I was already in a bad mood for some reason, and this really big dude that I had never met in my life did the cliche thing and bumped into me. He was way bigger than me, so it knocked me into the lockers hard. It was quite obviously on purpose, and was confirmed so by the look he gave me over his shoulder. I was so tired of being pushed around, I turned back to him and yelled, "What the F?" in a way that sounded like I wanted to say more. I walked towards him, and he and his friend, who wasn't as big as him but still much larger than me, turned to meet me, smug smiles and all. Then I yelled something out like, "Who the F do you think you are, you piece of crap?" And I'll remind you that I was a small and chubby person, so swearing loudly was my only real defense. Well, he strode towards me, shoved me back a few feet, I somehow didn't fall, and he asked me, "What? You want to go?" And then I said the single stupidest thing in my life and yelled, "F yeah, I do, as long as your little B-word ass doesn't get in the way." And I pointed to his friend, and I felt my stomach drop out my ass and noticed the crowded walkaway suddenly stopped. Everyone froze and stared, realizing they were about to witness a murder. Thank Christ, this one girl ran and got a teacher. I was all puffed up and pretending to get ready to fight, while in my head I was praying to a God I didn't believe in to have mercy on me. The teacher, though, broke it up before it started. I got in-house detention for a couple of days for screaming profanities, and the douche who shoved me didn't get into trouble because it was a crowded walkway and it was an accident. I walked a different path to my 5th period for the rest of the year and thanked the girl who saved my life. Story number 28. I had been working at a new office job for a while, but wasn't really fitting in too well. In an effort to get to know the other employees, I tried to become actively interested in their lives. I started getting on well with the head administrative assistant for the office. She had just come back from her honeymoon a few weeks before and finally brought her photo album to show everyone her trip to Bali. We had a break together, so she was proudly showing me her photos and playing tour guide. In all her pictures, there was always this one guy off in the background. I pointed and said, "Who's the fat guy?" Then she turned to me slowly with a totally blank look on her face and said, "That's my husband." And my attempts to apologize were futile. I never say things like that. I will swear to this day that an evil demon had possessed me for about half a minute and that I was speaking in tongues. Needless to say, I didn't exactly become one of the crowd in that office. Fortunately, or unfortunately, I didn't stay at the job very long, by my choice. Story number 29. In high school, I had a phase of responding to random things with "your mom." Example, you say, "I'm hungry," and I say, "Your mom's hungry," which is pretty cringeworthy to think back on, really. But twice it backfired pretty hard. The first time I had just gotten into a car with a friend whose mom had MS pretty bad, and had been in a wheelchair for quite some time. As we went to drive off, he told me to wheel the car around, to which of course I responded, "I'd wheel your mom around." Oh boy. Then the second was a few weeks after my friend's mother had passed away in a pretty tragic accident. We were playing Gears of War on his Xbox and he had a pretty good kill on me, and he said, "You're dead." And I responded with, "Your mom's dead," and before stopping from realizing what I was saying. The damage had been done though, and that was the last time I made that joke. Oh, early 2000s video game trash talk, how I miss you so much. But I want to piggyback off of this story because I have a relevant personal story. And I was in class one day and I was talking to 4 other people, and one of them was my friend, person 4, and his dad passed away the year prior, I want to say. And for some reason, we were talking about grandfather clocks. And so I point to person 1 and I'm like, do you have a grandfather clock? And I point to person 2 and I say, do you have a grandfather clock? And I point to person 3, and then I get to person 4, my friend, whose dad passed away prior. And for some reason, my brain had an error. And I didn't say, do you have a grandfather clock? I said, do you have a father? And I stopped myself right there. I could have kept going, but I just had an error and I froze and I broke and something came over me and I wanted to crawl out of my skin. Thankfully though, we were friends. We had dark senses of humor, but that's not something I would joke about, but I felt so bad. But he laughed it off, thankfully, and I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, but I felt terrible. Ryan, if you're watching Undersparked, I'd like to apologize one more time all these years later. Anyway, next story. Story number 30. I was working at a grocery store one summer. One of the guys that worked there was in the break room at lunch looking really glum, and I asked him what was wrong. He told me a girl he'd slept with was pregnant, and he was going to be a father, and he wasn't really pleased. Anyways, my break ends soon, and I go back down to the cookie aisle to stock the shelves. He came over a while later, said he was going home, but wanted to grab some cookies to cheer himself up before he went off, and he asked if I had any suggestions. So I said to him, how about some Dad's cookies? I didn't mean it as a joke. Dad's cookies, they're a brand of cookies, they're awesome, and they're effing tasty. But anyways, his eyes just glazed over at my suggestion, and I realized what I had said, and I felt so bad, and I just burst out laughing because I couldn't believe I had just said that to him. I tried to tell him I wasn't joking or trying to be funny, but kinda just left. I still feel a little bad. Wow. It took 10 seconds after sharing my own personal story to find another one that was similar-ish to mine. And I feel better knowing that I'm not alone in this universe and Oh, I love this video. Anyway, next story. Story number 31. I was at a restaurant with some friends and we were having good banter with the waitress. She was old enough to be our mom, and in her words, she was a voluptuous woman. She was joining in all of our jokes, and we were saying how great she was and how we were going to marry her. We were very drunk at this point, and then she said, I'm going to bum you out now. I'm actually a widow. And we sat quietly for a minute, and drunk me felt like I needed to say something, so I said, well, at least you didn't need to care for him through dementia. And I don't know why I said it. I wanted the ground to swallow me up. She just said, right, and made an exit. I felt awful. We got to dessert and asked her to join us, which she did, and she was still pretty fun and cool with us. I still felt awful, though. Story number 32. So, this happened 2 days ago, but I just realized it about an hour ago. Backstory. I have a friend, G, 19F, who is an absolute angel, but her younger brother is really rebellious, and she semi-complains about it quite a bit. She's worried, I guess. And I have another friend, B, 18M, who has a pretty strict mom and a younger sister. He's always good and listens to his mom, though. So, us and other friends, were being driven by G's dad in his car, and I have this terrible inability to shut up. We were talking about how B's mom wouldn't let him do something, and I was like, oh, you should really try to rebel a bit more. And I reasoned that if he was so good and obedient all the time, then his sister, who was starting her rebellious teenage years, would really seem bad when compared to him, so he needs to pave the way for his sister to be less under their mom's control. It made sense to me then, and it just came to mind, and I completely didn't think about how that pretty much described the situation with G, and I was pretty much blaming her for being too much of an angel, and her dad was there and probably heard it, which kinda adds fire to the fuel because it may have reminded him of his own situation. Hit a little too close to home kind of thing. The thing is that my friends were intensely aware of my F-up, but I was not. They talked about it to me afterwards, but I had already completely forgotten what I said, so I was just confused when they said I shouldn't have said that. It's not a terrible screw-up, but the fact that I realized it so later makes me cringe. Story number 33. I'm super late to the party here, but I have 2 really bad ones and I will never get over them. 1. So, my sister had a miscarriage while I was away at college. When I came home for some holiday or another, she still had the pregnancy weight. I totally forgot about the miscarriage. So the first thing I say when I see her is, hey sis, how's the pregnancy going? And my mom gasped, and my sister shook her head, and I felt like the worst human alive. And then number 2, I also remember when I was a kid, maybe 7, my mom and I were waiting in the lobby before my piano lesson. She asked me if I wanted to get something to eat afterwards, and for whatever reason, I was possessed to make this perverted comment, no, but I'll have some milk
Coke because that's the only thing I can have. Get it?
Then pointed at boobs. She gave me the dirtiest look, and I will never forget it. I don't know why I thought that was a funny joke in any way, or why I thought my mom would respond well to that. Ugh. Story number 34. The day before a visit from the regional manager, my boss tells me to make sure not to mention that I knew about the visit. The day of, we get a call from another store telling us that the RM just left and would be heading to our store. The RM and district manager arrive, and I go out of my way to say something to make a good impression. I walk over and say, "Hello, how was your drive from the other location?" Nice, awkward pause, and then the RM responds, "Good, but can I ask you a question? How did you know we were coming from the other store?" And then a nice, awkward deer in the headlights pause, and then I quickly made up some shoddy excuse about how the other store called to ask about something and mentioned it in passing. DM ends up taking the rap for spilling the beans, and nothing really comes of it but a finger wag. Still absolutely mortifying. Story number 35. I was at a Halloween party dressed up as a gypsy fortune teller type lady. I had a dress and jewelry and makeup and a wig, and I was looking hella fly. I should mention at this point that I am a guy. I was talking to this girl at the end of the night as things were winding down and people were getting ready to pass out. I took off my nice wig because I didn't want to ruin it since I was saving it for a friend, and said girl saw my blonde hair and noticed that it contrasted with my dark eyebrows and said,
"Oh, you bleached your hair? That's cool. Isn't that supposed to damage your hair, though?"
To which I replied, "Yeah, I think I lucked out though because my hair is still super soft." And she heard this and immediately wanted to feel my hair to confirm, so I obliged, and she said,
"Wow, it is super soft. Do you use conditioner?"
And she said this as she ran her fingers through my hair. I then looked deep into her eyes, cocked an eyebrow, gave her a half little smile, and I exclaimed, "F yeah, I use conditioner!" And I immediately regretted everything, having yelled in this poor girl's face because my brain forgot how to brain. Needless to say, we just kind of avoided each other for the rest of the night. Story number 36. For reference, I am a short, round, white Southern woman. This is important to note. So, I was sitting in a car with my husband waiting on an oil change. It was a long wait. It was lunchtime. There was a Wendy's right next to the Oil Can Henry's, and he asked me to run over and grab lunch. He said he wanted the Big Bacon Classic. When I walked into Wendy's, one of the most gorgeous men I have ever seen was standing at the counter ordering. He was an African-American man, over 6 feet tall, muscular in tight jeans, tight white t-shirt, motorcycle boots, bald and just beautiful head to toe. I suddenly realized that the lady at the counter was talking to me, and she repeated, "Ma'am, ma'am," several times. When I realized she was talking to me, it was already obvious I was just staring at him like a moron. And then she says to me, "Would you like to order?" And then I close my mouth, and in my thick-ass Southern accent, I say,
Yeah, can I get a big black bacon cheeseburger?"
And I could have died. I wish I had. He was smiling at me and wasn't mad, but damn, I'm an idiot. P.S. My husband laughed at me. He thought it was funny when I told him. Story number 37. This was in my preteen age area, so about 10 to 12 years ago or so. I wasn't a very bright kid back then and decided that for some ungodly reason to try and figure out what self-pleasuring meant, rather than asking my parents or doing the less embarrassing thing and just Googling it like everyone else. Well, something happened in a TV show or a movie, and my dim-witted brain made the assumption that self-pleasuring meant practicing a speech in a mirror. Yeah, might be able to tell the general direction this will go. A couple of days later, I've decided I've had enough of a kid bullying me on the bus home. So after being bullied for weeks on end, nearly every day, I finally start going at him with insults that have been built up, and I finish him with, "You are so stupid, your dad has to help you self-pleasure." And everyone left on the bus is laughing like crazy. And I should have left it alone, but no. I added on, "That doesn't make sense since you can't practice speeches alone when there's other people." And then laughing stopped. Staring happened, and eyebrows were raised, and shamefully walked off the bus as my 10 seconds of fame were gone. And then, oh yeah, part 2. Fast forward to that weekend, I get taken to my dad and stepmother's house. She is a very religious Mormon, so this was about one of the worst things I could have done. A new pastor, completely fresh out of taking classes, trips to Salt Lake City, Utah, begins to give a stuttering, nervous speech, and he can't even stand without swaying around constantly. He says something along the lines of, "I've been practicing this speech for weeks," and out of nowhere, something possessed me to stand up and say very loudly, might I add, "So you've been self-pleasuring for weeks? I thought people usually do that in 1 or 2 nights." If you've never heard the sound of around 100 families turning to stare into your soul at the same time, it is horrifying. No one ever mentioned that moment to me again, and never thought of it once until now. Story number 38. I know I'm late to this, but I still feel like a crap for it. So, like everyone else, I'm a post-it. So, when I was 16 or so, my dad and I got into a fight about my poor school attendance. I had missed like 15 math classes over the course of the last 2 months, and the school called every time it happened. So he said something along the lines of, "I know you're smarter than this. Why won't you live up to your potential?" And then he followed up with, "What's it like to be a failure?" Now, my dad and mom were several years apart. Like, he was almost in his 30s when I was born, while my mom was almost 18. Sure, it was weird, but they had her parents' blessings and were in love for a while. Plus, it brought me into existence, so… Anyway, without missing a beat, my craphead self decided to blurt out, "Oh, I don't know, Dad. What's it like to be a predator?" And then his mouth opened, and then closed, and then opened again, and I remember the instant regret. But for some reason, I couldn't manage to say I was sorry, and after a moment, he just told me that we would talk more later. We didn't talk for a few days, and I seriously hope he doesn't remember it. It's never been brought up since. Story number 39. When I was in the 10th grade, I volunteered at my local hospital, and I would often help patients get to the physical therapy wing for patients that needed help getting to PT. One time, I played basketball for several hours the day before I volunteered, and my legs were killing me, and I had a long day of walking from patients' rooms to the PT wing ahead of me. I had gotten to the hospital at 8 a.m., and I can't function well before 10:30. I'm not a morning person at all, so I didn't really think before I spoke. So I've been helping people get to and from the PT wing for about an hour at this point, and then I'm told to go bring this one lady to the wing, and then I get there, and she was sitting in a wheelchair, and I noticed she had no legs. So I get to pushing her wheelchair, and we were on our way to the wing, and we were chatting, and she asked me how I was doing. And without thinking, I said, "I'm pretty good, but my legs are killing me, you know? And I'm not looking forward to being on them all day." Completely neglecting the fact that she didn't have any legs, and she said, "Oh," and I realized that I effed up. And then the rest of the trip was spent in awkward silence. Story number 40. My senior year of high school, I was talking to a group of friends when my ex walked up to join the conversation. We had been broken up for about a year and a half at this point, so all of the awkwardness had kind of dissipated, and we were becoming normal friends again. Anyways, I decided to greet her with a fake punch to the stomach because I was an effing spaz, and she understandably asks, "What was that about?" To which I responded, for literally no reason, "No more babies!" And she just stood there staring at me for what felt like eternity. I panicked, my mind shut down, and I further explained my actions by saying, "Because you're pregnant." And she just walked away and started crying. I immediately remembered her youngest brother was stillborn, and I effing saw his ashes. She was apparently actually pregnant and hadn't told anyone. She then lost the baby after about 5 months. That was the last time I ever spoke to her. Story number 41. A New Year's Eve party was happening at a well-known college bar, and I had arrived and had a few drinks while hanging out with some friends. Stepping away from the group, I thought I would venture out into the crowd and cheers to anyone and make small talk to the ladies. On my trek, I smelled a delicious plate of bar food bacon cheese fries. My senses smelled out the plate and led me to 2 very pretty ladies dining on the plate of cheesy fried goodness. To my delight, I thought, "Hey!" As I thought to myself, pointing 2 thumbs up just like the Fonz from Happy Days, I casually made my way through the crowd and stopped in front of the ladies with beer held high. I thought to myself, I got game, and what better than 2 ladies with cheese fries? The 2 college girls stared at me as I asked them politely, "Ladies, how is it you eat so much and look so good?" And one of the ladies replied, "F you," as I delightfully smiled and said, "All right," cheersing to no one, and I was never offered any cheese fries that night. Happy New Year. Story number 42. When I was 14, we went to the pool with the entire school. It's called swimming day, and while we were laying in the grass between activities, I was laying next to this pretty girl amongst all my friends. There was about 5 or so meters between us, so I really had to speak up if I wanted to say anything, and she was just sunbathing. We'd been playing football in the grass where there was some mud, and I noticed some had gotten on her arm. So I turned to her and I said, "Hey, Susan, you've got crap on your arm," and I said it with a big-ass grin on my face. She just looked at me stunned. All my friends and classmates stopped talking and looked over at me, and then one of them started to laugh, "What the F, you idiot?" And turns out she had a pretty big skin mole, which she was self-conscious about. I was cringing so hard I just froze with that goofy smile on my face, playing it off like I knew what I said all along. I wanted to die, and I think she literally never wanted to talk to me again. Story number 43. I'm late to the party here, I know, but I'm going to share anyways. I was going to the funeral of my great-grandfather. I didn't know him much, and right as we parked in the parking lot, my dad rolled up the windows and turned around and just sat there, staring at me. He then explained in a very serious tone that I should not make any jokes during the funeral. Afterwards, sure, but not before or during. The rest of the family in the car kind of held their breaths until my father unlocked the car doors to let us all out. As we step into the sunlight, surrounded by grieving family in the cemetery with a duck pond, the smell immediately hit me. The stench, I'm sure, caused by the ducks crinkled up my nose, and I said, "Ugh, it smells like something died over here." And by the time I realized what I was saying, it was too late. No one laughed, no one smiled, no one even knew it was a mistake. All there was hatred and shame in the looks I received, and I'm surprised we didn't have 2 funerals that day. Story number 44. Last summer, a longtime friend who I'd lent some camping supplies came by my house to give them back to me. She had gone for a month on the Appalachian Trail and was telling me about the trip. She told me about it beforehand, and I didn't remember many details, but I was sure of one thing, that she had gone on the trip with her mom. So I asked a couple of times how her mom was doing. She was hiking the whole thing, and she looked at me strangely and kept talking about other things. So I was like, "Is your mom still going to finish it?" or something, and she was like, "It's not my mom, it was a coworker." And I said, "I was so sure it was your mom." And she was like, "Nope," with a bit of a weird tone to her voice. Then my heart started beating out of my chest as the realization that about a year ago, her father killed her mother and then himself, and it hit me like a train. I had sat with her and sent flowers and listened to her crying about it. The silence was unbreakable as her and her husband stared at me, realizing I finally understood my idiocy. After letting me suffer for what seemed like an eternity, they told me it was okay, and I have not spoken to them since. Story number 45. Background. My now husband used to work for a fast food chain. It wasn't and isn't regarded as a particularly respectable or difficult job, and he is relatively intelligent. They also messed with him a lot about him expecting to work extra hours at short notice, and this used to piss me off. Well, one time we went to his grandparents' house on Christmas Eve, with his parents, siblings, and their partners. I get very anxious in social situations and tend to babble when I'm nervous. The conversation turned to my husband's job, and I made some kind of comment about how I wasn't keen on his job. His grandmother asked me why, and I said, "I just think he could do better." His brother and his brother's girlfriend both worked at the same place, though. It had been mentioned at me before how they were touchy about people criticizing the workers at this job, and they took the job very seriously. I'd only met them once before at this point, and everything went quiet. It was awful. I was so rude. I later worked at the same job too. Can't believe it. Story number 46. I was in the UK this year and last year for a master's degree, computer game engineering, and I had several friends in the class from China. They went to a huge convention in Germany, whose name suddenly escapes me, but it's a huge gaming one. They could speak English. The people that worked at restaurants could understand English, but either couldn't or refused to speak it to my friends. For context, we are pretty good friends, and we have a funny back and forth over the whole China versus US thing. Particularly funny because a lot of our thoughts meshed. Example, we agreed that if the two countries went to war, the US would wipe the floor with the Chinese military, and then stop because there's no way we'd actually win a land invasion of China. Anywho, he was relating to me the frustration about this communication barrier when all of a sudden he just shouted, "Why can't everyone just speak English?" And I sat back with a smirk on my face and my arms crossed over my chest, staring at him without saying anything, and he looked at me confused for a moment before declaring, "Did I really just say that?" So, side note, I'm willing to bet that the gaming convention whose name escapes OP was probably Gamescom, European E3. Also, rest in peace, E3, you are a real one. I lament about you frequently. Next story. Story number 47. When I was a younger lad, I was extremely ADHD. I often said crap that was inappropriate and sometimes at inappropriate times. I didn't have many friends. The fat kid who ran his mouth. One of my only friends was a little slow. Not like special ed autistic slow, but he wasn't as bright as the rest of us. They had a program called Resource that would give students who were a little behind some one-on-one help on learning. It was never a secret when they went. We knew when they were going. Sometimes the resource teacher would even come and get them from class. So one day he's leaving to go to Resource, and one student said, "OP's friend, why do you have to go to Resource?" It wasn't malicious, just grade school curiosity. He was clearly embarrassed, and he sort of just grinned and had the cool knocked out of his step. And without giving him much of a chance to answer anyway, I decided to yell out, "Because he's stupid!" And to this day, I feel terrible about it. I didn't mean it maliciously, I don't think. Why would I? He was one of my only friends. And sometimes to this day, I still wonder if he ever thinks about it as much as I do. Story number 48. Hopefully I'm not too late here. So during high school about 5-ish years ago, our entire high school basketball team would take each summer to go out to different team camps, tournaments, etc. Long story short, we are on the court in a pregame huddle finalizing plans for the game about to start. Our coach basically finishes his pep talk, and it ends with something to the effect of domination, total domination. And for some reason, I still have no idea to this day, as the huddle splits apart and we walk out to the court, benches, etc., I just yell out, "Dominatrix!" Everyone just stops and stares at me. The funniest part about all of it is that I had no idea what that word meant. Little sophomore me had just heard it somewhere and blurted it out. Some guys busted out laughing, others looked with the most confused faces. Our coach just pretended he didn't hear it and continues on with the game. We ended up winning, and afterwards in the locker room, I instantly grabbed my phone and just faked that I was on Facebook or something. But really, I was Googling what the F I had just said. And not a single teammate or coach wasted a single moment to make fun of me for it. But I'm just blessed that nobody brought it up at our end of the season awards banquet in front of all of our parents and fans. Story number 49. I was with 8 of my guy friends, and it just so happened that we were walking towards a woman who was walking her dog. They all made comments to each other about how cute the dog was, like normal people, but instead I said, "Your dog is mine." In my defense, I was trying to be funny and I didn't mean for her to hear me, but I said it much louder than I intended. So she looked up in terror to see this large group of guys walking towards her, one of whom just yelled, "Your dog is mine," at her like a crazy person. And I had to hide my face behind my jacket. I was so embarrassed. Story number 50. I work retail, and I was talking with a customer that knew my younger brother. As we got to talking, she mentioned how she didn't like his girlfriend at the time, and I was curious because both seemed like nice girls. She goes in depth about talking about how when she was sick, my brother's girlfriend kept on reaching out to her and wishing she would get better soon and such. But before she had gotten sick, she was constantly mean to her and didn't appreciate her being suddenly nice just because she had gotten sick. Mind you, this girl looks completely fine to me, and without thinking at all, I ask, "What, were you sick with cancer or something?" To which she responds by taking her hat off, which had a full wig attached to it to show that she had lost all of her hair with chemo treatments. And she says, "Well, yes." And I don't think I've ever felt so bad about saying anything in my life, and probably never will again. Story number 51. I was checking out a local large store, Target, Walmart, on Valentine's Day and bought some fresh flowers for my wife and chocolate and maybe a pair of comfy pajama pants or something. Anyway, it was obvious they were Valentine's gifts. I walked up to the cashier as my turn came in line, and she was an early 40s, skinny, worn-out working lady with bags under her eyes, fried hair, looking like she had seen a lot of sun in her life because her skin was leathery. Picture a typical smoker redneck southern girl 20 years after her prime. And she says, "Looks like you're preparing for a nice night." And I say, "I never know what to do for Valentine's Day. You're lucky you don't have to worry about that." And after an absolute crushing silence for 25 to 30 seconds, she says, "Your total is $25 or whatever. I meant that you're lucky you don't have to worry about it because you're a girl and usually you're on the gift receiving side." But it 100% sounded like I meant you're lucky because you don't have anyone who cares about you. I set my jaw and finished payment and turned on heel and walked out with my entire body feeling awkward. Story number 52. I had to go on a day-long course to be a team leader at work. In my defense, I didn't really want to be there as I was happy in my position, but I am good at what I do, and management insisted on me progressing. So I go. Had to get a train ride pretty far away and traveled with another coworker. Get in the place, and there was about 20 people all there for the course. The day went okay, but eventually began to get boring, and all I could think of is I need to speak to the tutor about leaving early to catch the train I needed to get home. I wasn't planning on staying there any longer than I had to. So, comes to the final stretch of the course that was more practical than just sitting there listening to the tutor blab on, and we was asked if anyone was willing to demonstrate how to adjust the coffee grinder to make sure it's dispensing the right type of coffee for the business. This has to be done daily, and it's pretty important and it can be tricky to be fair. Although I can do it with my eyes closed, I was in no position to get up in front of everyone as I couldn't really be asked being there in the first place and just wanted the day to be over. Even if I did, I wouldn't have stood a chance against the heavy-set girl who said, me, with her arm almost dislocating as she jumped up and down, arm raised, dying to show off her skills. The tutor says okay, and she steps forward. All 20 of us stood in a circle around her. After a 5 to 10 grueling minutes of her attempting to fix the machine, the tutor says okay, and she steps forward. All 20 of us stood in a circle around her, and after a 5 to 10 grueling minutes of her attempting to fix the machine and the tutor giving her the benefit of the doubt, he finally says, "Okay, I've seen enough." To which I openly replied to the whole room, "Yeah, some of us have to go home today." And I have never seen so many jaws dropped in gasps, including myself, and a poor harmless girl slowly walking away, her head dropped in shame. I can be a very anxious person at the best of times, and I'm never rude to people ever. This was an all-time low for me, and it haunted me for a very long time. Have you ever seen the movie Liar Liar? You know the scene where Jim wakes up and the first thing to pop in his mind is a reply to his boss after sleeping with her and saying, "I've had better"? This was me for a long time after. I would actually wake up and say, "Yeah, some of us want to go home sometime today." Story number 53. As a private in the Army, I told 2 senior officers that they were jackasses. So, I had only been in the Army about a year, so I was a very junior rank. Well, I was stationed somewhere where I worked directly with senior officers. This led to a situation where my at-the-time girlfriend and I were having dinner with 2 of our officers. I told her prior to going that these are some of the smartest men I have ever met, and are well respected in the scientific community and are very well published. I didn't think much of it prior to going, but both of my officers were very forward as a part of their personalities. The dinner went okay until they asked us about marriage. We were planning on getting married, but at the time my wife was finishing up her associates. Then they noticed my wife had a promise ring. They thought this was completely goofy, then proceeded to joke about it for a good 20 minutes. This did not go well with my girlfriend. Afterwards, I talked to her about what she thought, and she was like,
Honestly, I thought they were jackasses.
Well, about 2 months later, we were at a dinner with all of our staff, and the 2 officers bring up our dinner and how well it went. Then one of them looked at me point blank and asked me what my girlfriend thought, and without missing a beat, I said, "Well, sir, to be honest, she thought you both were a couple of jackasses." And thank God I did not get in trouble for that one. Story number 54. 6th grade. We'll never forget it. Playing an emotions game as a class, and one kid gets up in front and the class will shout out an event, and the kid in front is supposed to act out or make a face to show the emotion you feel with that event. The kids start saying normal things like, "got a new puppy," or "broke your Game Boy," and the kid in the front is acting out the emotions. So cue my WTF brain, "Your dad died." And the kid, thank Christ, just played along, got a real sad and mopey face, and then everyone laughed. I guess I kinda have suppressed the aftermath, and I kinda just thought I crossed a line and maybe should stay quiet for the rest of the day. Immediately, a new kid was brought up to act, and I was promptly pulled into the hall. The teacher just glared at me real serious for a long time. I just stared back, not knowing what to say, and then she cocks her head and goes,
Do you know that his dad just died?
And I have never felt more awful before or since then. I did not know, and I felt horrified at myself. And I think she said she would tell him that I didn't know and spared me the embarrassment. I'm literally cringing writing this like it just happened. Sorry, man. You're a good dude, and I'm an idiot. Story number 55. Was at a fancy party in Boston full of rich Jewish people. I am neither rich nor Jewish, but I have a friend who is, so I think he invites me out of pity or something. I was talking to the financial aid director of a large university, and she was talking about how difficult it was to allocate funds, how to balance how many students you can let in that year, etc. And I nod and say, "Ah, yes, the Schindler's List problem." And then I just started digging deeper. You know, I could have sold this watch for 2 more poor students, and she left to go refresh her drink. Oh my God. She was awesome too. I totally wanted to be besties with her. Story number 56. Cool, this will be buried, but it still sticks with me. So, it was a sociology class I needed to take to get into the education certification classes at Pitt. The class was in summer, run by a student going for her doctorate, and it was painfully obvious that she had very little of an idea how to run a class. On one of the late classes, she has her friend come in and show some video she made for her art doctorate. We were told she wanted all of us to have a question prepared before or after the video. I was working in the summer, so I decided to do the after the video question. My mistake. The video was of a hamburger with googly eye singing Wicked by Chris Isaak. So not only did I start to sort of chuckle to myself, but at the "I don't want to fall in love" part of the refrain, the burger sings up to the sky and it rains SpaghettiOs, and I just effing lost it and laughed. No one else laughed. So this happened again at the next refrain, and I missed whatever the message was, and it was question time. So both my female teacher and her friend looked at me, and my question was, "So, when did art become that?" And I am so shocked I held on to my B in that class. Story number 57. I have too many of these in my life. This happened last weekend. I was hanging out at the local bar with an old boss of mine, a local business owner, and her husband. The boss left for a second, and I was making small talk with the husband because I hadn't seen them in a year or so I was catching up a little. A guy walks by in crutches that looked familiar, and I said to the husband, "Hey, is that your brother?" He just looked at me and walked away with an angry, sad look on his face. I was a drunk at this point, so I just moved past it. Well, I got home and sobered up, and I realized that the husband's brother had passed away almost exactly a year ago. I almost exploded with guilt and embarrassment. I immediately got on Facebook Messenger and I told him I am an effing moron, and I must have forgotten, and he still hasn't gotten back to me. The last few days have been a total crap fest of self-pity and loathing, and I just want to bury my head in the sand. Be careful what you say, kids. I'm pretty sure I just ruined my 10-year-old relationship with my ex-boss and her family. Story number 58. I volunteer at the outpatient center of the local hospital. My job is just to escort people to either the radiology or mammography waiting rooms. I also escort people visiting family elsewhere in the hospital. Normally, when I'm escorting someone for radiology or a mammogram, I ask them how their day is. Usually people say they are good, save for a few who are nervous or are going for an injury. On this particular day, I was told to take a family to the heart center. There was a mom and 2 young kids who looked visibly distressed. They were all very quiet, and while on the elevator, without thinking, I asked them how they were doing. The mom stared at me in shock for a couple of seconds before quietly replying, "Could be better." I was completely mortified, and we were all completely silent until they got to their room. It turns out, they all just found out that their father had a heart attack. Now, I am very careful whose day I ask about. Story number 59. When I was 20, I used to work at a marina, and I sold products from the service counter. It was early summer, so some of the boats were still in the parking lot directly in front of the marina's window, waiting to be put out in the water. One of the boat owners was outside cleaning her boat, and it just so happened that she was a very fit personal trainer wearing high heels and a bikini. After a while of cleaning the boat, she walks into my store, high heels and all. I greet her when she walks in, and she asks to see where our cleaning products were. As the helpful employee I was, I kindly walked her over to our cleaning products. Then I say to her, "So, what type of cleaner are you looking for?"
I'm looking for something to clean the top deck of my boat with.
"Oh, I know exactly what you need. Nonskid private part cleaner."
Did you just say non-skid private part cleaner?
Yes, I did. She gave me a smile and proceeded to the counter, and our conversation ended there as I snuck in the back room and wondered why in the hell I just said that. She joked about it a few weeks later when she inevitably came back to the marina to take her boat out, and I still to this day cannot figure out what made me say that. Story number 61. Some friends and I were eating dinner during a boys-only weekend in a very secluded place. I met one of my friend's parents a few hours earlier, and I immediately loved them. But my dumb brain just noticed something odd that I knew I had to keep to myself. The only problem is during our dinner and after a few drinks, I start telling my friend, "Dude, your parents are so nice. I can't believe we stayed there only for a few hours. And your mom managed to make us lunch and a homemade pie? Hold on, the F is up is coming." Now, remember that thing that I wanted to keep to myself? Well, the effect of the alcohol started hitting me hard, and I ended up saying something very stupid out loud. "When I first saw your mom, I thought she was your grandma." As the words came out of my mouth, I knew that was dumb to say, and really, it didn't come out the way I wanted to say it. My friend really didn't like my stupid comment and slapped my face. I deserved it. Story number 62. I used to work at a large oil company as a Linux admin. I was responding to a series of incidents caused by no fault of mine or my team, but either way, I worked to get everyone back to working. This was while this group was currently working to stop drilling and was monitoring rigs after an order to halt Gulf of Mexico deep water wells. My equipment was used to run seismic and drilling models. Towards the end of the day, I was still running around getting people set up, and a particularly vocal individual was complaining that his special system was slow and his 84-inch monitor was too small, etc., ignoring that there were hundreds of users still down. He ended up complaining to the CEO of GOM, Gulf of Mexico, and made up quite a few stories. This person and the CEO stopped me to start ripping into me about his petty issues that really meant nothing, and were more than likely not going to get taken care of how he wanted. They were both going on and on about how important they were and how people like me can never be like them, and then the CEO said, "Do you know how I got to where I am now?" And without thinking, I just said, "Because crap floats?" And I walked away. Luckily, my team lead couldn't stop laughing long enough to say anything to me, and I managed to keep my job and worked there for several years after that. Story number 63. Had a friend. He posted something on Facebook about depression and how it can ruin lives and other similar stuff. We had talked about depression before personally, so I figured it was something similar. I said not to use it as an excuse and try and learn to get past it. Then a bunch of other people replied to me saying how much of an a-hole I am. So I replied something else just defending my stance on the stuff. Well, I guess it ended up he had a friend that unalived himself that was depressed. There was no mention of this in the post, no RIP X-person, absolutely nothing about someone committing self-unaliving, so I had no idea, and obviously wouldn't have said anything if I knew the context. I was just trying to spur the conversation and not have people wallow in misery. Not friends anymore now, and everyone that saw that post probably thinks I'm a terrible person. Also, just going to add this in case anyone replies, I have family members that have dealt with clinical depression. I know it is a real thing, but I also believe you can't use it as an excuse to have a terrible life, and people should still try and make a positive effort if possible. Story number 64. My psych professor in high school had a younger sister with Down syndrome. We had just talked about it recently, like a day or two before. A friend of mine in class asked a really dumb question, and one day we were all joking at him as he tried to work his way out of it. I looked at him and I said very clearly, "Mate, are you mentally retarded?" And I realized what came out of my mouth, turned slowly to the front, and made eye contact with my professor for a moment, and she just gave me a blank stare of utter disappointment. All I could do was nod in silent agreement and hang my head in shame. After class, I apologized to her, and she was cool about it, but I felt awful because I had a great amount of respect for her. Easily one of the best professors at the school. Story number 65. While in mid-interview, the third stage of a 3-part hiring process, I literally cut off the interviewer's sentence. There were 2 of them, and we were beginning to wrap up, everything was going well, and I was fairly sure I had it in the bag. The reason I cut him off is because I suddenly realized I had walked away from my car in the nearby car park without paying for and displaying a ticket, due to nerves. I said, "I'm really sorry, but I've just realized I haven't bought a parking ticket. Would you mind if I covered it on my phone now?" In hindsight, it was dumb to do during an interview. The fine is only £30. However, they commended me for mentioning it and said most people wouldn't. Surprisingly, they didn't care. That wasn't the bad comment, though. Riding the high of their praise and having gotten away with it, when they said, "Take care of the ticket, we'll be right back," while heading out of the room, I came back with, "Thanks, I'm the most hideously forgetful person ever when I'm stressed." It was a project manager role. I did not get it, and I can still see his face drop in my memory as he closed that glass partition door. Story number 66. I worked at a movie theater in high school, and one of the things we were evaluated on was upselling customers. They looked at how many larges you had sold. I usually just tagged on the standard, "Would you like to make that a large? It's only X more." But with friendlier or younger customers, I'd often get slightly more playful and say something like, "Ah, come on, you know you want one." It came out naturally and went over well. Never thought much about it. One day, a pretty friendly couple comes up and orders 2 medium drinks and a large popcorn. I upsell, they say no. I tag on my response, "Oh, come on, you know you want a large." And there's a brief, awkward silence. And then the guy gives sort of a half laugh and says no. I move on. While I'm taking payment for the order, his girlfriend goes, "So, you know you want a large? What was that about?" Then I explain, and then I just say that it's something I say sometimes. And she says, "Yeah, I'm sure," in an incredibly sarcastic tone and looks to be nearly in tears. Her boyfriend rushes through the transaction and they leave. It's not until it's done that I put it together. She was, and this is not a dig, really very overweight, and thought I was making a joke about it. I didn't mean that in the slightest, and I've always felt like an a-hole for it. Story number 67. In 1997, I was invited to Skywalker Ranch to see the re-release of Star Wars at the Stag Theater, arguably the best theater in the world at the time to watch this flick. It was my first time out there, and the security was really tight. A lot of ILM folks were there, and some real luminaries were in there as well. So I'm gleefully watching in full nostalgia mode, the sound, the effects, mind-blowing. Then Greedo walked in and shot first, and I reflexively said, "Bullcrap." Now, the Stag has excellent acoustics, and the scene is dead quiet after Han stands and walks away. And I was sure that I was going to have a file on me after that, or at least be escorted out. Nope, made it through the whole movie. But F, that was nerve-wracking. I mean, George was supposed to be in there as well. F me, man. Well, I've been up there many times since as a fan and a client, so I guess all is well, unless George has some kind of long-term revenge in mind or something like that.
Uh-oh, you sat in big doo-doo.
Opie, you fool! And also, we all know that Jar Jar Binks was a Sith Lord. Come on.
Master Opie, me should be showing you my red lightsaber right now.
Oh, Jar Jar, where did you get that weapon? And also, yes, I will be reading the next story in the Jar Jar Binks voice. Are you ready? Just kidding. I will never do that. Next story. Story number 68. 911 dispatcher here. I don't know if this is my worst why the F did I say that moment, but it is my most recent. This happened a couple of months ago. Names have been changed to protect the innocent and not so innocent. Lady calls 911 having a serious mental crisis. I recognize her as being what we'd call a frequent flyer, someone who calls fairly often, usually due to a mental illness or something. I believe she suffered from schizoaffective disorder in that she was both schizophrenic and bipolar. His particular caller would call in a couple of times a month, usually having some kind of breakdown. This time was a bit different, though. She answered the phone crying, saying she wanted to report an SA. Being as empathetic as possible, I gathered information. She was having an attack right now, but she wanted this guy arrested as well. The problem was, she was reporting an SA that occurred in the 80s. She also said that she didn't want to live anymore. So while the SA was important, the more pressing concern was her mental well-being, so I put in a call to check welfare on her. During my information gathering, I had managed to build a good rapport with her, and she was telling me a lot of information, which can sometimes be very difficult for SA victims and people with SMI, and she was both. She told me her attacker's name, we'll call him Jonathan, and she told me he was her stepdad. She told me where he lives, in a different town, and here's the F up. She told me that I was very good at listening and that she appreciated the way I was handling the situation. She then asked me my name. Now, the only identifying information that I'm required to give is my badge number, but in cases like this, it's encouraged you give your name to help with the rapport. It is permissible to give a fake name, but I've never found a time where that was really needed. If someone wanted to make a complaint, they wouldn't even need my badge number. Lines are recorded as well as phone numbers and when they called. Well, this was a time I should have used a fake name. I said, "My name is John." If you recall, her attacker's name was Jonathan. She starts sobbing and crying out, "His name is John," and then she disconnects the line. I attempted to call back, but there's no answer. Luckily, officers were only a couple of minutes out, and she didn't do anything drastic. It could have turned out much worse, and I felt like crap for a long time after that. And I still think about this incident fairly often. Story number 69. Back in the 7th grade science class, about halfway through the year, we got an intern from the University of Florida to come in and teach the class for a few weeks. Her name was Miss Andy, but people called her Miss Mandy. Now, to most people, that nickname wouldn't make sense, but to those who met this lady, Miss Mandy makes perfect sense. I didn't actually realize until her first or second day teaching the class. It was when I had asked for help on a worksheet and she took my pen to write on my paper. Her arm was probably 6 inches away from my face as she reached for the paper. I had to do a double take to process what I was seeing. This lady had more hair on her forearm than my 13-year-old 7th grade self had on my entire body. Like, holy mother of God, this lady was hairy. So anyways, the days go by, and by now, everybody has realized that Miss Andy has very fertile hair glands, to put it nicely. And not only were her arms and legs covered in hair, she had hair that went down probably halfway down her back. So, Miss Andy was giving the class a lecture one day, and as usual, I wasn't paying attention. I noticed how long Miss Andy's hair was, like her normal head hair. It was very long down her back like I mentioned before, and the thought just popped into my head, and before I could stop it, I said it out loud to the whole class and said, "Wow, Miss Andy has a lot of hair." Now, as I was saying that, I realized how it could have sounded like I was talking about her strangely hairy limbs, and I felt awful. The best I could do was stammer out a meek, like, "Her head hair, a lot of head hair," and I think that only made it worse. To this day, I still remember the look on her face as she turned around. I remember hearing my friends Peyton and Gavin laughing and a few giggles across the class, but I felt so awful about what I said, and I knew my ears were turning bright red. Story number 70. When I was in 9th grade, I had a math teacher who gave us all workbooks and didn't actually teach anything. I was working through one of them and got to a bunch of geometry problems, and I needed a protractor to solve them. My teacher kept all that kind of stuff in her desk, so I went to her desk to get one. There was a line, so while I was waiting, I started looking at one of my classmates. You could totally see her bra through her shirt. Then I looked at another girl, and it was the same thing. So being 13, this is enough to turn me on massively. So I get to my teacher's desk and say, "I need a bra," instead of "I need a protractor." And it's like, WTF? Are you even paying attention to the words you say? And the teacher looked at me and said, "You need to calm down." And then I asked for the protractor. As an aside, as a kid, I thought using workbooks like that was an absolutely revolutionary way to teach. I remember excitedly telling my father, and his response was, "That's not teaching. That's a teacher being lazy as crap and not doing any work. I'm not paying taxes to that school, so you can do workbooks all class instead of being taught." And he got super pissed off, and I think ended up calling the school and bickering at them about it. I remember being shocked that he didn't think it was an incredibly good idea because that's how I felt about it. It was like that all year and his complaining didn't change anything. I never had another teacher do anything like that, and I never heard anyone else say that they have a teacher doing anything like that, so I guess it never caught on. Story number 71. I am a Brit, and a few years back I moved to Germany for work. At the time of this story, I'd been living there for a couple of weeks. This particular day, I was on the way to visit a friend across town traveling via the bus. The bus was very busy, but I had a seat. However, partway through my journey, an elderly man gets on the bus holding his shopping in arms. You need to pay extra for a shopping bag in Germany, and this guy was clearly trying to save some cash. So I get up and offer the guy my seat by gesturing with my arms, and the old guy gratefully takes the seat and says something in German. Me being new to the language but wanting to fit in, I attempted to say no problem in German. But not knowing the word for problem, I simply ended up saying nein, and then awkwardly turned around. From that poor guy's perspective, he took my seat, said thank you, and then the guy that gave him the seat just said no, and then turned around. Thankfully, my stop wasn't too far away, but from there, I felt very awkward. Story number 72. Late to the party here, but I've enjoyed all of these and I need to add my own. My wife's aunt's husband had recently passed away. The aunt was pretty upset as it was sudden, and she had taken her first trip since his death to see my in-laws. She gets there, and my father-in-law says, "You look great. Where's Jerry? Is he coming?" No, he's dead. Then, I worked triage at a hospital. Imagine asking 50-plus people why they are there and past medical history. Gets really monotonous. I'm just finishing up with a younger heavyset guy. Nice guy. Was there for something benign. I have 2 questions left to ask him. Do you have any medical problems and how much do you weigh? I look him straight in the eye and combine these into, do you have any weight problems? And instantly began apologizing. And the poor guy just laughs and says he probably could lose a few pounds. And then finally, at the same place, I had a lady come in and tell me that she thinks she's having a miscarriage. I'm going to ask her how far along she is, but I instead mistakenly say, how far along were you? Past tense. A-hole. She starts crying, and I again apologize for being a jerk. Story number 73. Oh, this is a thread I was born to win, but too bad it's already got 13,000 comments. I worked at an electronics store as a warehouseman when I was a kid. Christmas time, they hire lots of temporary staff, including that year a new receptionist. I had just gone through the office, met the new receptionist, a very older, thin, ragged-looking lady, and hopped into the elevator to head downstairs. A couple of other employees get in with me. I turn to a buddy from my department, and I say, "Wow, new receptionist looks like a crackhead, eh?" He doesn't reply. The salesman behind him is looking at me oddly. The elevator stops, everyone steps out. The salesman says, "You need to watch your mouth," and then walks away. Buddy turns to me and says, "Yeah, that's his wife, and she's got multiple sclerosis. And I regret very few things in my life, and that is one of them." Story number 74. So, I was a groomsman at a friend's wedding. I was a year or 2 older than him, and he was about 4 or 5 years older than her. She was a little older than her friend. Long story short, I'm about 27, and the bridesmaid I'm walking down the aisle is about 18, maybe 19, and I'd never met them before. Anyway, the wedding was taking place at a vineyard, and as such, the aisle was just a lawn with all sorts of bumps and indentations and uneven footing. So we're doing the rehearsal, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, she's gonna be in heels trying to walk down this uneven path where we won't even be able to see what's coming because of the runner. I need to let her know that, and I'll try and stable in case she stumbles. But that if we do both fall, it's best to just get back up and keep going so it isn't a big deal. So I turned to her, and my mouth spit open something like, "If you pulled me on top of you, that would be okay." And she didn't speak to me for the rest of the wedding. Thank God the bride knew me well enough to find my mistake hilarious. Story number 75. When I was in anatomy class, my best friend in the class was a guy named Jose. Everybody liked Jose. He just had a real good personality. He was one of those people that you would almost agree with anything on because he always had a good argument or explanation. Not a bullcrapper by any means, just empathetic and intellectual. And his wit was like an effing razor. So one day I tried to compliment him to all of our surrounding classmates. You guys ever see that episode of Family Guy where Lois sleeps with Bill Clinton? Then Peter goes to kick his ass, and it just cuts shots from an angry Peter on Bill's doorstep to Peter and Bill naked in Bill Clinton's bed, and Peter saying, "Wow, you are good. You are really good." Yeah, that's what I was shooting for. A small anecdote that would basically imply Jose to be so charming that he could do something as impressive as F your wife, then actually seduce you on top of that, and you wouldn't even be mad. Well, instead of an analogy that conveyed that in an abstract sense, I basically just said literally that, Jose is like so charming that he could basically break into your house and steal from you and then make love to you and you wouldn't even be mad. And everybody around me immediately was like, what the F? And I was just sitting there like, yeah, there's no saving face on this one. Jose was probably the only one that wasn't totally creeped out. He was laughing his ass off over the whole situation. And they never let me forget that blunder either. They brought it up periodically all the way until graduation. Man, whenever Bill Clinton would show up on Family Guy, you know he's sleeping with somebody. And afterwards, they would always say, he's just so damn convincing. I don't know how he does it, but you know what? How about we give Bill Clinton one more term, huh? Why not? Just for funsies. Let's just see what happens. I mean, just out of curiosity. Yeah, I know you're a little curious, right? What if we took this really old, close to senile guy and just put him in the office as president of the United States for 4 years? Oh, wait. Oh, God. Oh, no. Oh, I've made a political statement. Which old guy am I talking about, though? You'll never know. Anyway, next story. Story number 76. Wow, I never thought I'd have the chance to cathartically relive this moment in such a perfect opportunity. Anyways, here it goes. Feel free to berate and hate. I know I deserve it. I was dating the most perfect girl for about 3 months, obviously very early in our relationship. When I say perfect, I mean literally the best. Easiest person in the world to talk to. Same ambitions, same taste in music, best cook on the planet, loved smoking weed and effing more than I do. Just overall the best. Anyways, we were set to watch my friend's cover band, then go out to dinner with a group of friends afterwards. Before heading out to the gig, we had probably half a bottle of Maker's Mark between the two of us, went to the gig and had a few drinks there, then to a nearby sushi place and had a few rolls, sashimi, and a few bottles of sake. Unknowingly beforehand, my not-so-recent ex happened to be a part of the group. This obviously raised tensions between myself, girlfriend, and my ex. I don't particularly remember any specific conversations or arguments between any of us, as I and others were simultaneously having 2 or 3 separate drunken conversations at the large 10 to 12 person table. Well, we all went our separate ways, and on the car ride back to her place, she just unloaded on me. Seriously, just unleashing on me, saying the most evil things at me. We both bawling in the case while she just unleashed vile hatred on me. I have a history of having a venom-laced tongue myself, and always quick to attack with potent words that strike true with visible results. So this being said, I bit my tongue and held my words and let her speak and yell and cry it out. When we arrived at her place, I had to speak my piece. Terrible decision, I know, but I don't have much restraint. So while packing my things, I went off, yelling and crying alike, spewing a few foul words aiming to hurt. I don't recall precisely everything, but I do remember the last thing I yelled while she was on the floor begging me to smoke the bowl that she had just drunkenly packed, begging forgiveness for what she had said. I won't repeat what I said then now, but it still haunts me to this day. And I'm so sorry, Em. You were honestly the best. When or if I invent the time machine, that's the first thing I'm going back to change. Only telling me to bite my tongue and talk about those issues when we're both sober. I'm so sorry, and I'll never forget you. Story number 77. So, this happened when I was probably around 7 years old, but to this day, it is one of the most absurd word vomit WTF things I have ever said to another person. There was this girl who was also my age at my church. Instead of going to the service, the kids would get to play in some back room with toys from the 60s. Well, Hamtaro was a big deal at the time, and I had just gotten some little Hamtaro figurines. Now, this girl had a reputation for lying and making up absurd stories in attempts to get out of trouble, but she was the only girl my age to play with. So lo and behold, one day, my Hamtaro figures I brought went missing. I immediately hone in on her, knowing that she had played with them last. She has no idea and tells me something absurd. I can't remember what exactly, but it was basically unbelievable. At this point, I am horrendously upset, and by the time my parents come to pick me up from the playroom, I'm livid. I tell them that the girl had lost or stolen my things. In the end, she hadn't, and I got a hold of my Hamtaro figures. And now, this is where the F-up occurs. With both my parents and her parents present, she tells her parents how silly it all was that I thought she had taken the toys. They laugh, she laughs, my parents laugh, but I don't. And I straight up say to her parents, "Wow, yeah, for once, so-and-so wasn't lying and actually told the truth." Awkward silence. My parents drag me out and ground me, and I no longer have someone to hang out with at church. Story number 78. I had a lady call my work a couple of weeks ago to dispute some charges on an account that she had with us. I didn't have the authorization to reverse charges, so I offered to let her speak with my manager. She refused to speak to my manager because apparently she had an unpleasant experience with him and refused to be transferred to another department. I told her that if I were to reverse the charges on her account, especially with the amount she wanted reversed, I would lose my job. She then proceeded to call me an a-hole just like my boss and say that I was just as mindless of a drone for working at my crappy company. And I lost my cool. I raised my voice and I said to her, "Are you going to personally pay me my monthly salary when I lose my job for helping you with a minor inconvenience?" And my manager was standing right next to me. Thankfully, he decided that since she refused to be transferred or speak to him, that she left me with no other option than to hang up on her or go off on her like I did. I was still crapping my pants though, because she could have technically had the calls pulled and listened to by someone above my manager. Story number 79. Oh God, I was working at my university bookstore, and well, when we had credit card transactions, they had to sign off for it. So, this girl comes up to the register, and she's rocking quite a mustache. And so in my ignorance, I'm staring at it and realize that I'm just staring at it. So I look away and do the transaction in peace. However, my brain did not. Lo and behold, I Freudian slip, and when I asked her to sign the receipt, I started to mumble out, "Shave here, please," instead of "sign here, please," and I could feel my heart stop and my throat swallow my voice. I look at her, she looks at me, and in my head, I was like, "F it, I'm going to quit today." She walks away, and I just sink to my feet. But it's okay. She heads upstairs to check out a few more things in our bookstore, and then comes back down. I decide to own up to it and apologize for being such an ignorant F-head, but she nonchalantly goes,
What did you say? I didn't hear you at all.
And I thanked whatever higher being exists, and the wave of relief that hit my body was effing wonderful. Story number 80. Not technically mine, but I was a part of the action, so I feel like I have the authority to tell it. I worked in a grocery store in college. We were very much a hometown good old boy store and had a ton of regulars. One of our specialties was helping out the MR patients that were in assisted living houses around the area. We had one particular group that would come in, and they loved to bag their own things. The problem was, though, that these particular patients were inbred, and I mean that in the most literal way. They tended to get a little close, and it got awkward. But we, at least myself, knew that they weren't much harm. The last time I remember them coming in, I was bagging for a girl that was checking them out. They were doing their thing, and I was trying to do mine. No big deal, all as usual. After we were about done, the cashier realizes that she made a mistake with the grandmother's change receipt. She immediately blurts out,
"Oh, I'm so retarded. I forgot to give you back your change."
And I'm not offended by much of anything, but that was the one time I believe my face has ever gone into full-on stone-cold shock. I immediately look at her and notice the same dead-eyed look back. That poor girl. Okay, so this is something I've seen many times in life and several times, especially since doing Undersparked, but why is it that some people stop stories at like the 3/4 point? What happened afterwards? What was the lady's reaction? Did the employee get fired, suspended? Was there a confrontation afterwards? It clearly didn't just end there. Did she at least awkwardly walk away? Sometimes you realize not everyone is good at telling stories, and it's kind of baffling sometimes. Anyway, next story. Story number 81. A girl asked me out in 9th grade by walking up to me at my locker and saying to me,
"So, my friends said I should tell you already that I really like you and have had a big crush on you," and
me, being literally autistic, thought she wasn't done speaking yet and just wanted to make sure I heard her. So I responded by shutting my locker door and then saying to her in my typical autistic monotone voice, "Okay." She looked taken aback and said she had to go. So I walked up and went to basketball practice. Since this happened on a Friday, I figured that she got cold feet or something and would tell me whatever else she wanted to say to me next time I saw her on Monday. So, for 3 days straight, all I could think about was how a girl I liked told me she liked me too, and I was so happy. Monday rolls around, and she won't even make eye contact with me. I'm confused by it, and figured maybe she changed her mind and didn't want to ask me out. I think maybe 2 months later, I remember sitting on the bus coming home from a basketball game when it finally hit me as to what happened. I am literally mentally retarded, and I still think about it to this day. However, this story does end kinda happily. A year and a half later, she found out my side of the story through a mutual friend and then harassed me for a year until I finally agreed to go out with her. I didn't really have interest in her at that point, which is why it took me a year to say yes. And she ended up dumping me after 37 days for some cool smoker kid. We really only spent about 4 hours alone during that entire time, so I felt like I got kinda shafted there, and don't really count it as a real relationship, but whatever. We have absolutely nothing in common anyway, and my brain is too messed up to have maintained that relationship. So, yeah. Long story with unnecessary details, but I figure no one will read it since the post is already 12 hours old, so it was nice to write it all out. Story number 82. A little late here, but it's what I did and not so much what I said. I am a paramedic. We were doing a transfer to a local hospital, and our procedure when we drop a patient off is to get a signature saying they now have patient care. Well, the nurse I was giving a report to seemed like a completely normal person, nothing going on at all. So in the medical world, there are a ton of names that just from the person saying it, I am not able to spell it. And if they have a heavy accent, it's even more difficult to spell. Basically, I asked her what her name was, and her name was not an easy name, so I asked her to spell it. She got through her first name no problem, and then got about 3 letters into her last name and started this very repetitive stutter, and I honestly thought she just made a simple mistake in saying the letter and thought she was over-dramatizing it, so I started laughing. She did it again on the next letter. At this point, I realized she actually had a legitimate stutter. I panicked and just didn't say anything besides a measly thank you as she handed the laptop back to me, and I got out of there as quick as I could. Ever since this incident, I now just hand them the laptop, ask them to type their first and last name for me, then have them sign. And if the nurse happens to be a Redditor, I want you to know I am so sorry. Story number 83. This will get buried, but here goes anyway. Was at a vendor event for the company I work for. Pretty easy gig, just talk to people and see if they're interested in our product. And I was talking to 2 ladies at this event, and one had sunglasses on, the other didn't. And are you ready for what I said? It's painful to even write out, but here goes. Are you 2 mother and daughter? Yikes. As soon as the last word fell out of my mouth, I knew I was screwed. The lady not wearing shades flipped out, and the other lady took hers off, and it was apparent they were closer in age. Who knew shades could take off 20 years? There I was with nothing I could ever say to fix it and no hole to crawl into. Now, in my defense, if that's even possible, the lady's life I ruined looked like she had been to a few parties. Still no excuse though, and that was the day I learned the phrase, "So, how do you 2 know each other?" Story number 84. Picture a piano tuner. Old guy, white-haired, old leather bag full of tools, maybe some weird facial here, right? I'm a piano tuner. When I was first starting out in my early 20s, I drove a beat-up Dodge Caravan with a busted headlight and looked and dressed like a teenager. And so I had a hard time seeming legitimate, especially to old rich guys, which make up a significant portion of the clientele. I remember one morning pulling up into a big mansion, gravel crunching under my tires as I stared at the huge entryway with dread. This was as awkward for me as it was for them. I rang the doorbell and waited. After a long time, I heard someone coming and the door finally opened. It was an old rich guy. He looked me up and down. He cleared his throat several times in a strange, gruff manner. Yes? Hi, I'm the piano tuner. And there's a pause. You look like you could be in high school. And he punctuated this with a sound somewhere between a laugh and a cough. And this was not great. This was not going great, and I would just have to shrug it off and pretend that there was nothing weird about a kid wearing beat-up sneakers and shuffling into this guy's mansion and messing around with what was most likely his most expensive possession. Apart from the mansion, as you might expect, I had a lot of clients hovering nearby in the early days just to keep an eye on me, and this guy was sitting directly behind me, reading the paper and scrutinizing my every move. He was not about to miss it if I slipped up and scratched the perfect finish on the piano. Now, tuning a piano takes a mix of concentration, patience, and persistence, as there are about 200 strings which don't particularly want to stay where you put them. Even so, the mind begins to wander almost immediately, and during the process, I generally find my thoughts begin to float above the repetitive sound and motion happening, and the resulting experience is something like a school exercise where you can't stop staring out the window. In the end, it's done, but you can't really remember doing it, and you've been fantasizing about something completely different the whole time. I was in this state, thinking about war and the news and recent conversations I had had, becoming more and more comfortable with my task, and also peripherally aware of my client, the rich guy, reading his paper and making what seemed like little explosion sounds which were gradually getting louder and more frequent. Without thinking about it, in the middle of my work, I suddenly felt so comfortable and sure that I had misjudged this funny old guy who was obviously narrating his newspaper article with sound effects for both of our enjoyment that I jovially spoke up. "Making little explosions over there," I said, followed by silence. He looked over at me and shuffed. "What?" He was dead serious. In a meeker tone, I repeated, "Are you making little explosions over there?" And his response was annoyed and terse. "No." And I came to realize in the next few moments that he had a tic which manifested itself as a kind of throat-clearing shuffling sound, and which he proceeded to indulge uncontrollably for the rest of the tuning. Story number 85. Worst thing I said? Nah, it's okay. Here's the backstory. I was at a ski resort for snowboarding lessons for college credit, easiest A ever, and I had shared a lift with a pretty college student, and we got along well. So we ended up boarding the rest of the day together, and when she got invited to a party by one of the instructors, she brought me along. Somewhere during the day, she had mentioned that she was an exotic dancer. I miraculously didn't say anything stupid and kept treating her how I would treat any attractive woman. I went to the party with her and her 4 attractive female friends. At the party, one of the instructors turned out to be the prototypical skier, sleeping with anything with boobs type dude, acts like he doesn't believe she's a dancer, dares her to prove it. Finally, she gets annoyed enough by him that she starts dancing, and without removing a single article of clothing, leaves everyone without a doubt that she's a professional dancer. She primarily used me as her focus of attention. So after the party, me, my dancer friend, and her 4 friends all head back to our hotel. We all happen to be staying in the same one, and we get to the hallway intersection. My room is to the right, their room is to the left. The dancer asks me, "So, you want to come back to our room and hang?" Me being shy, obtuse, I say to her, "Nah, it's okay." And she looks back at her friends and asks, "Are you sure?" "Yeah, I'm good." "Well, good night." "Night." And after I walk back to my room, I realize my mistake, look out my door, and try to find their room, but to no avail. I'll forever be in the dark on what I missed. In case it's not obvious, back in that day, I had no clue and I had no game. Story number 86. My old lady and I were driving from Louisiana to New York with a 35-foot house trailer. It wasn't much, but it was ours. We had owned it for over a year and had lived in it since we bought it. We never had a title and the tabs were super expired. Anyway, on our way to a show in New York, we had a flat on the trailer. Not the first, and we had just driven 1,000 miles. We were broke. Anyway, I pulled the flat and put it in the truck. The spot is about an hour away, and I can get a fresh tire. So we leave the house on the off-ramp and go to the other town. Well, 10 miles out, there was a DNR checkpoint for ash borers, and my inspection had just expired. We get pulled, questioned, and left on the side of the road as my truck gets towed. So here I am, house trailer left behind, truck towed, and my wife, my dog, myself, and a flat tire on the side of the road in upstate New York. We get picked up by the show owner a few hours later, and it takes a week to get back to the house. Now, this is when it gets interesting. As the show owner and I are going to pick up the house as we hit the exit, all we see is flashing lights, 2 wreckers, and state patrol. F me. So I show up, claim worship, and the cop is just giving me the clamps. I tell the story of the last week or so, and he talks to the tow guys, and they settle on $100 cash for showing up and damaging my house while trying to hook it up. I paid them. Then he questions me more and asked me about my license. I told him I never had one. Never had one. I had meant to say in New York, but I choked. Anyway, I immediately have the "why did I say that" reaction, and so he is running the tags and comes back. I act like business as usual. Let me put this tire on before I go to jail. So I am down there, and he comes up and asks me what kind of animal I had in there. He was a canine cop. I told him I had a Feist. He tickets me for non-reg of a vehicle and sent us on our way. After calling for backup, it was the weirdest thing ever. Well, we drove for about a mile in silence, then we looked at each other and just started laughing our asses off that we had just gotten out of whatever the F that was. Story number 87. Husband, kids, and I did a week at Disneyland. We did a ton of shopping. Both my toddler and 4-year-old came from the park with a lot of plush toys and swag. Flying home via LAX back home to Canada, we all go through security. As I'm going through, the security officer had my overstuffed suitcase on the security scan conveyor belt, and he asks me, "Can I open this?" Which I actually didn't think was a yes or no option, and I look at him and say, "Sure, but it'll probably explode." I had to sit on it to zip it up, and everyone in the vicinity that could hear what I just said stopped and looked at me. My husband looks at me and asks, "Why the hell would you say that?" And I just look at the security man and say, "Oh." Anyway, I get pulled out of line so fast. My husband and kids are separated from me. I have 2 officers pull me out of the way in a corner while a few more security people go through my suitcase. At this point, I believe they know I just made a bad choice of words, but I am so nervous. And the security guy starts to lecture me, and all I can effing do is giggle. The type of giggle that you should under no circumstances release. I get the giggles so bad that I'm starting to shake from trying to hold it in. Red face, watery eyes. Finally they clear me. But man, my husband was so mad at me. The security guards looked disgusted at me, and pretty quiet ride all the way home.
Wasn't this like story number 2 or 3 or something, just in a different way? I mean, I guess it's not uncommon for people to use similar verbiage at an airport, unfortunately. But if this was my wife, after I knew she was okay and we were in the clear and the kids were okay, I would laugh too because it's kind of funny. It's stupid funny. I would laugh at her. But you know what? We would be giggling together. I'm just saying. But, also don't do that at an airport. Anyway, next story.
Story number 88. I was young and dumb. It was Halloween. I was at a party with many of my friends that liked to do drugs and get drunk. My date for the evening was a girl that was so straight-laced it wasn't funny. To her, a hard night was 1 or 2 Mike's Hard Lemonade. To this day, I doubt she's ever been drunk. Anyway, I asked her out some time ago. We had been friends for years, and she said we just wouldn't fit because of the way we are. However, we went to a number of parties together. We were good friends, and dancing with me kept the drunk idiots from hitting on her and dancing with her against her will. Every party, literally every person we encountered asked if we were dating, because we were obviously so great together. After this happened like 5 times, she took me aside on Halloween, gave me a kiss, and said she wanted to go out because she was tired of having not to claim to be dating when obviously we should be. Earlier in the night, my friends had convinced me to take some ecstasy, enough to actually affect me, which was very uncommon for me. My friend was very against drugs. So, being on drugs and finally going out with her, I felt not telling her I was on drugs at the moment was being kind of disingenuous. I told her this after we had been in her car making out. She was about to leave, I had kissed her goodbye, hugged her, and told her everything. She gave me a look of total devastation. I have never had someone look at me in such a disappointed way. She went home and did not talk to me for 4 years. One day she saw me, and it was like we were old friends again. Always felt like I missed such a huge chance. She was an amazing woman I let slip through my grasp because of peer pressure to do drugs. Didn't do X ever again. Story number 89. I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, still in grade school, and the teacher had set up a game where each classmate went up in front of the class and acted out an emotion or feeling that began with the same letter of their first name. Whoever guesses it first gets to be the next one to perform. Then, a girl, we will call her Bridget, gets up and starts acting. A couple of minutes go by, and no one is getting it. Me, sitting with my friends, remembers a word that one of them used the other day that I didn't know, but I know it starts with a B and means a woman or something. So, you guessed it, I jumped in front of the whole class and yell, really proud of myself because no one else guessed it yet, "Bridget is a B word!" So poor little me is sent to the principal's office and I arrive in tears. Obviously, I had no idea the meaning of what I had said, but everyone is acting like I'm some terrible person, so I must have done something wrong. I just remember feeling so dirty. Okay, so regarding the game that OP was playing, if your name doesn't align with an emotion, what do? I'm Kevin. What emotion starts with K? I could be quirky and say, oh, I'm clumsy. Wait, no, clumsy isn't an emotion. I'm stupid with a K. What emotion starts with a K? And yes, I know quirky doesn't start with a K either. I'm gonna be quirked up. That's all I can say, y'all. But anyway, folks, we are at the end of the video. We made it so far. Thanks for listening to these videos. Thanks for letting me narrate on this channel. I just enjoy it so much. It's so fun, and I read all the comments, all of them. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Have a really good day, and bye-bye.